Hey, it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to make a cowl neck sweater vest on your Addi knitting machine. So let's get started. This is a very simple project. This is only made of flat panels, doesn't require any shaping whatsoever, and because it is sleeveless, as long as it's made of a lightweight yarn, it can even be worn in the spring and summer as well. So I've got my flat panels here. I've got them joined already on one side. And before we get started with the actual assembly, let me explain what this is and how it's going to work, how you're going to get it to fit properly. Basically, to make this project, you're going to need to take a couple of measurements. You're going to need to measure around the fullest part of the bust. And you're going to take that number and divide it in half. So half of the circumference of the bust is going to be your front of your vest, and the other half is going to be the back. So you're going to divide that number in half, and half of the fullest part of the bust measurement is going to be the width of your front panel and the width of your back panel. Now you may need to join multiple panels to get to the width that you need to fit you, and that's fine. You can join them with the mattress stitch seam, or you can join them with the method that I'm going to show you in a little bit with this lace join right here. Another measurement that you're going to need to take, you're going to take the end of your measuring tape and you're going to hold it just above the hip line, right where you want the hem of the garment to fall, and you're going to hold it there, and you're going to take the rest of the measuring tape and measure all the way up to the top of your shoulder. And you're also going to keep holding that end of the measuring tape still at the hip. You're going to also measure from the hem to the underarm. So what I've got here is I've got my flat panels. For me, with the yarn I'm using, and this is a fairly loose gauge, one panel is enough for me on the Addi King. It's wide enough for me, and it's also going to be have a little bit of width added to it when you join them together with this lace join, but you don't want it to be exactly the correct measurement for the circumference of the bust, because you are going to need a little bit of ease. And ease is just a little bit of extra room in the garment to move, so that it's not tight. Close fitting is okay, but you don't want it to be too tight. So here my flat panel is, I've got two flat panels here. This is my front and my back. They're both exactly the same, so it doesn't matter. But again, if you need to join multiple panels to get the correct width, that's okay. You can join them however you like. But this is what I've got right here, and I've got my one side already joined. I'm going to show you how to join the other side in a minute. So once you have taken your measurements, you're going to do your knitting. So I've got my flat panels here. I've got a panel for the front and a panel for the back. Again, if you need to join multiple panels together to get enough width, then that's totally okay. But as far as length goes, I've got right here, if this is my hem, which it is, it's going to be, I'm going to add an edging onto it later, but this is going to be the end of my knitting. I've got the length from the hem to the top of the shoulder, plus about 10 to 12 inches, whichever you prefer. So this top section up here is going to fold down and create the cowl part. And then the gap in between the hip to underarm and the hip to shoulder measurement is going to be your armhole. And if you want to double check the length of your armhole, then get a garment that fits you well and just measure from the base of the armhole to the top of the shoulder, just to make sure that it's going to be the right size. So let me just show one thing here before I show you how to assemble it. The bottom half is going to be what we would normally call inside out, where the purl side, or the quote wrong side of the knitting, is facing outwards. So when we assemble from the base of the armhole down, we are going to treat this back side of the knitting as the right side. But I want my cowl part to have the normal right side facing out, and because that's going to fold over, with the top part where the cowl is, we treat this side as the right side. So you get your neat seam here, your crocheted lace join. This is going to be the cowl part that folds over, and down here, because we treated this inside, which is actually going to be the outside, we treated this side as the outside when we assembled it, instead of just treating it as the inside and then turning it the other way. We also get a nice neat join on this side. If we were to have just done it the same way, then it wouldn't be the end of the world, but you can see this doesn't look quite as neat where we have it done on the knit side up here and just turned over, as it does when it's done directly from the purl side. Now at the top again, where we're using the knit side to face out, you're going to do it from the knit side. So what you're going to do is, once you've knit your panels, you're going to measure from one edge, one corner down here, and you're going to measure from here to, you're going to measure the length of the hip to underarm measurement, and you're going to place a stitch marker there. Then you're going to measure from the hem to the top of the shoulder measurement, and you're going to put a stitch marker there as well. And I'm using pretty big ones, but you can use whatever ones you want. So now that we have that marked, we can now join it to the other side. If you want, you can also mark it on this side as well, but it's not a requirement. So now I'm going to show you how to do the crocheted lace join. Now, because this is the bottom here, this is the lower portion of the garment, and we're treating this side, this purl side, as the right side, we need to work from the right side. So I'm going to flip it over so that when I bring my two edges together, the purl side is facing me, and it's going to be treated as the right side here. And one more thing I do want to mention here is that I already blocked this. I joined the one side and I blocked it, or you could also just block the panels individually before you join them, and that makes it a lot easier to work with because it's not going to curl so bad, and it's just a much better drape. The fabric is set, and it's just a little easier to work with after it's blocked. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom. This is where I have my, it may be your cast on edge, your bind off edge, doesn't really matter. You're going to treat it the same way. So I've got a crochet hook, approximately, this is worsted weight yarn. It's a thinner worsted weight yarn, and I'm using an H for the join, a 5mm. But if you have a different tension than I do, different gauge, whatever, or you're using different yarn, then feel free to choose whatever hook size you feel comfortable with for this. And I have some more of the yarn that I'm working with. So the first thing I'm going to do is leave a good 6-inch tail and make a slip knot. And now we're going to go down here to the edge of the flat panels, and we're going to find, let me show you something here. Every other row along the edge of a flat panel is going to have a tighter stitch, or a stitch that has 2 strands of yarn on that outside edge instead of 1. So watch, if I insert into this stitch, I've got 1 strand of yarn there. If I insert into the one next to it, I've got 2 strands, because the ones with 2 strands are where you get to the end of the row and then you turn around and go back the other direction. That's what we're working into here, because that's going to be stronger because there's 2 strands there than just a single strand. So now we're going to start joining these together. You're going to go to one edge or the other, doesn't really matter, and you're going to find the very first stitch with the double strand. the stitch with the knot at the end. If it's tight, then it'll look like a knot, but it's just the stitch that has the double strand along that edge. And you're going to take your working yarn and you're going to slip stitch through that stitch. Then you're going to chain 2. You're going to go across to the other side and you're going to find the first double strand stitch on that side and slip stitch through it. Now we're going to chain 2 again, go across to this side again, and instead of working into the next double strand stitch, we're going to skip that one and go to the next one. So now we're going to chain 2 again, go across to the other side, skip the next double stranded stitch, and go into the next one, slip stitching into that. Now we're going to chain 2, go back to the other side, skip the next double stranded stitch, and go into the next one. You're basically going into every 4th row. So if you don't want to look for the double stranded stitches, then you can just count rows. So here's the last one I went into. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And the double stranded stitches, if you're not working super tightly and making those really tight, sometimes they're a little harder to spot, but if you just turn it over, they're the ones that have the little bumps where the stitch has more, it has an extra strand of yarn going through it. So I'm going to keep joining these together using this method. Chain 2, go across to the other side, skip a double stranded stitch and go into the next one, slip stitching into it, and repeat going back and forth between the panels. And I'm going to keep doing this until I get up to my first stitch marker. So I've made it to my marker, so now what I'm going to do is, as you can see here, these little chain 2s go at a diagonal. So I'm going to chain 2 one more time, and I'm going to go straight across my seam. Instead of skipping a double stranded stitch, I'm going to work into the next one. Normally we skip and work into the second one, which is, every 4th row, technically speaking. Instead, we're going to go into the second row, which is the first double stranded stitch, and slip stitch through that. And now we're going to tie off, because that is the end of our first seam. So I'm going to tie off like that. You can take the stitch marker out if you want to, because we're done with it. Now we're going to turn it around, and because this part down here, we worked this with the purl side facing, because this is the bottom part, so the purl side is going to be facing on the bottom. The cowl part up here is going to have the knit side facing out. So we're going to not only turn it upside down to start from the other end to work the other end of the seam, but we're also going to turn it inside out again, so that we have the knit side facing, like so. So now I'm basically just going to repeat what I just did, joining these 2 edges together, and I'm going to repeat the exact same crocheted lace join method to join this edge to this edge until I get to the marker. But instead of tying off, I will show you what you're going to do after that. We're going to leave the yarn attached. We're not going to tie off when we get to the marker. We're going to work a row of single crochet around the armhole. So I will show you how to do that when I get there. So now I have finished my second seam. This is the seam on the cowl. And you're going to take the stitch marker out. I've already done the chain 2 and go back across to make it straight, only skipping one row or going into directly the next double stranded stitch. So now I'm going to single crochet around the armhole. So I'm going to single crochet in each one of those 2 chains and single crochet in each stitch, the end of each row all the way around until I get back to where I started. So I am single crocheting in every single row. And at first, this might look a little bit lumpy or whatever, but once you block it, it lays very nice and smooth, as you can see on my other armhole. It lays very neatly. So I'm just going to single crochet all the way around the armhole, going into every single row, the end of every row. And once you get close to the other seam, this is the seam that is for the lower part, from the underarm down, you're going to find the tail that you finished with when you tied off that seam. First I'm going to single crochet in each of those 2 chain stitches. And then I'm going to start working into the other side again, working into the ends of the knitted rows, crocheting over that tail so that it is totally hidden and I won't have to weave it in later. So I'm just going to keep crocheting along this edge, working into every single knitted row, and I will show you what it looks like when I get back around to the beginning of my single crochet edging. Now, one thing I do want to note here is that when you're working into the ends of these rows, with the double strand rows, you're going to work into the double strand. But the rows in between are only going to have that single strand on the edge, so you're going to want to pick up another strand underneath it to go into, because you can't just work a single crochet into a single strand off the edge, or it'll look like it has holes in it. So on the double strand rows, we go through the double strand. On the rows that don't have the double strand, then we make another strand. We pick up the strand underneath to create 2 strands so that we don't end up with holes. Okie dokie, so I am pretty much back to where I started. And now I'm just going to, I'm not going to join the end of my row together. I'm just going to leave a tail, cut the yarn, and I'm going to take the crochet hook and I'm going to pull on that loop until the end of the yarn comes out. Thread that onto my yarn needle. And as you can see right here, I've got this first single crochet right here. I'm going to join this together with that one. And I'm going to insert my needle under those top 2 strands of yarn on the top of that first single crochet from front to back, just like you would crochet into it. So that recreates the first half of our edge. We're recreating the edge, so we don't want to have like a little knot or a join here where you can see where it stops. So we're kind of making this invisible. So there's the first side. Now we're going to take our needle and insert it back down into the stitch we just came out of. So as you can see, our yarn was coming out of this little hole right here. We're going to go back down into that hole. And that recreates the top edge of another stitch that isn't actually there, so that the edge of this looks totally seamless. So now I'm just going to pick up a strand of yarn, tie a little knot to secure it, and I'm going to weave the tail in. And one thing I love about working crocheted edgings onto knitting is that it makes it a lot easier to weave the tail in, because you can just weave it into the crochet, which I much prefer because it's totally invisible and I think it's a little bit more secure. So just weave in that tail. Alright, so now you can see what the armhole looks like. This one is a little bit lumpy because it hasn't been blocked yet. But on the other side, this one has been blocked and it is very neat, very straight, lays very nicely. So I'm just going to lay this out here. And this right here is the top, because you can see this is the front side of the lace and it was worked from the knit side. So I'm going to turn it back inside out. It's actually right side out, because on the bottom half we have it worked from the purl side, so that purl side edge is going to be the lower portion of the garment. So here's the, what you might call the bodice right here. Here are your armholes, and as you can see, the unblocked armhole is very lumpy looking and it curls in, but once you block it, it will lay very flat, just like this one. And up here is the cowl part. So this cowl part, just pretend all these yarn tails weren't here, because they're going to be removed and eliminated when we finish this up. This cowl part is going to fold down kind of like that, so you can see the lace from the knit side, and that's why we worked the lace join on the knit side for the top, because the right side of the lace join is going to face outward up here. So this is the basics of our cowl neck vest. We've got the bodice portion, the armholes, and up here is the cowl part. So the next step is to finish off the edge around the cowl and the hem edge. Now how you want to do that is totally up to you. If you would like to work a knitted or crocheted on edging, then you can totally do that. I'm going to do a crochet edging. If you don't knit and you don't crochet, then you can always do my how to bind off with a crochet hook method. And that will finish up this edge very neatly as well. And then once you block it, that will help to keep it from curling. So to work your edging, if you're going to do an edging, which is what I'm going to do, you're going to need to note before you start which side you're supposed to be working from, because on the bottom edge, the hem edge, you want the purl side facing you. When you go to work the cowl edge, you want the knit side facing you. So just make sure you've got the right side facing you. So I'm going to turn mine upside down and start from the hem, which is the purl edge. And I'm going to find my my live stitches here. These are the live stitches that we picked up, or it may be your cast on edge. Either way, it's going to be the same. And I've pulled out my yarn that's running through all of these just a little bit so that I can see where the end of it is. I've got my working yarn here. I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch on that yarn, pull up a loop, chain one, and single crochet in the same stitch. Now I'm going to insert it into the next stitch on that strand of yarn. Now keep in mind I have the purl side facing me because this is the hem edge. I'm going to lay the tail that I just created by joining a new yarn here over the top so that I can crochet over it and won't have to weave it in later. And I'm going to insert into the next stitch on that strand of yarn that's holding the stitches, single crochet through that stitch, insert into the next one, single crochet through it. So basically I'm single crocheting into each live stitch all the way around. So this is what you're going to do to begin whatever edging you choose to work. If you're crocheting your edging. If you're knitting your edging, then you would just knit the edging onto those stitches. So you're just going to single crochet into each of these stitches that's on the yarn that's holding them. Now you just want to remember when you get to this lace join part here, this lace join thing is going to count as 2 stitches. So you're going to put 2 stitches into the chain, the first chain that runs across that gap. Then you're going to single crochet all the way across your other panel, or panels if you've joined several, and when you get back to the beginning, you're also going to do 2 single crochets across those 2 chains that span across this gap, and then we will slip stitch to this first single crochet. Alright, so I've made it all the way back around. I've slip stitched into my first single crochet, and now what we're going to do is pull out the yarn that was holding all those stitches. So right here, this is where I had pulled out the loop. The end of, it's actually the beginning of the yarn that holds those stitches. The other end of it is over here at the other side of my panel. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull on it until that entire other end comes out like so. And you want to make sure that when you do this, you're using a hook that gives you a gauge at your personal tension, or how tight you crochet. It should give you a gauge similar to the knitted fabric that will give a decent amount of stretch, because this is going to stretch to go over the hip, and you want to make sure that it's not going to be too tight. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other panel. If you have more than 2 panels, then you're going to need to do it for each panel. Just pulling out the yarn that holds those stitches, those knit stitches. They're no longer live stitches because we worked through them. So instead of tying off right now, I'm going to go ahead and work a crocheted on edging. You could tie off here at this point if you want, but I'm going to work a crochet edging. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and weave in these tails from my panels. And you're also going to have tails from where you started your crochet join. So go ahead and weave those in as well. Alright, so I've woven in my ends and I've already single crocheted all the way around. So I'm going to work a crocheted edging around the bottom of this and around the cowl end when I get to it. Here I've swatched the edging I'm going to use. This is from the Crochet Stitches Visual Encyclopedia by Robyn Chachula. This is one of my favorite stitch dictionaries. In fact, this is my favorite out of all the ones I have for crochet. And I'm going to use this one right here. I love how it's charted and written at the same time. The only thing is that I'm modifying is that I'm not going to work a corner anywhere, because I'm just doing, you know, one strip of edging all the way around. So I'm not going to work a corner. I'm going to kind of ignore this part for the corner. But just get your favorite stitch dictionary and pick an edging out of it, or if you want to get this one, I will put the link to it in the description box. I love this book. But this is the edging I'm going to use, and so just keep in mind when you're picking an edging, the stitch multiple. This stitch pattern is a multiple of 6 on the sides, meaning if you were working this around a blanket, it would be the sides of the blanket, not including the corner. I don't have any corners, so for me it's going to be a multiple of 6. Now, a flat panel on the Addi King, which is what I used, is 43 stitches wide, and I have 2 of those. That makes 86 stitches, plus 2 stitches extra that went across this lace joint on this side and 2 stitches on that side. So that's a total of 90 stitches. So because 90 is divisible by 6, then this edging will work for the number of stitches I have. Now, if you make this a different size or whatever, then your stitch multiple is going to be different because you're going to have a different number of stitches than I do. But just pick a edging out of your favorite stitch dictionary that has the correct stitch multiple. So when it says it's a multiple of 6, meaning this little section right here is 6 stitches wide. This is your repeat. So you have to have a number that is divisible by 6. So whatever your number of stitches is, you're going to look for an edging that is a multiple, meaning it's divisible by whatever number will go into your total number of stitches. So if I've got 90 stitches, I could also do a stitch, a multiple that's a multiple of 10, a multiple of 5, a multiple of 15, whatever. As long as it's a number that divides evenly into the number that you have here. So I'm going to go ahead and work this edging on my project, and I will show you what it looks like when I get done with that. So here is my finished edging, and I just want you to take note of this one thing. Everybody's individual project is going to be a little different. You're going to use different weights of yarn, different gauges, etc., etc. So your knitted fabric is going to have a different amount of stretch in it. Maybe more, maybe less. So you're going to need to compensate for the amount of stretch in the knitted fabric with the amount of single crochets that you have here when you work into those knitted stitches. So when I did 1 single crochet into each stitch, it still had enough stretch in it to basically be straight with the knitted fabric if you just lay it flat. But when it stretches, you want it to have the same amount of stretch as the knitting. So what I did was, instead of working 1 single crochet into each of these knit stitches, I worked 2. Depending on the stretch in your project, you might do 1 in one stitch, 2 in the next, 1 in one, 2 in the next, or something similar to get the right amount of stretch. You want your edging to be wide enough that the knitting can still stretch all the way and the edging will not prevent the knitting from stretching. So I worked 2 single crochets in every knitted stitch, and that may also affect the stitch multiple of your edging as well. So make sure that you know how many single crochet stitches you have before you go ahead and select an edging, because unless you're just doing it, you know, 2 in every stitch, because if you just double the number of stitches, then that's not going to affect your edging because it will still be the same multiple. But if you have to do 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then 2, or 1 and 1 and 2, 1, 1, 2, then that will probably affect your stitch multiple. So make sure you choose an edging accordingly that will work with the stitch multiple in the edging pattern. So I've finished up my edging around this bottom edge, and I'm just going to cut the yarn and tie off, and I'm going to weave in that tail. And this is still unblocked, so it's a little bit lumpy, but that will block out. And as you can see, when it lays flat, it looks like it's a little bit wider than the knitting. Partially because it hasn't been blocked yet, and partially because the knitting is not stretched. But once it stretches a little bit, then it lays very nicely when it's on. So when we worked this edging across the bottom edge, because the bottom part of the garment is going to have the purl side facing out, we worked the edging with the purl side as the right side. So whichever row says right side, like on mine, their instructions here says that round 1 is the right side, and that is an entire row of single crochet. So you want to start your single crochet row from the right side, which in this case is the purl. But now I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing I did down here, but around the cowl edge, which is the top of the garment, except I'm going to work it with the knit side as the right side. So I'm going to work with the knit side facing me when I do the single crochet. So I will go ahead and repeat what I did down here on the cowl edge, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you make this project, let me know how it turns out for you in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, making sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching. Bye.